My name is Celeste Bishop, and today I'm 29 years old. 11 years ago, just 3 days shy of my 18th birthday, my parents dismantled my celebration because my older sister broke down crying, claiming it diminished her sense of importance. That very evening, I walked out with everything I owned. 2 worn duffel bags, a coffee tin holding $1,300 in carefully saved bills, and a single phone call to the only person who'd ever compensated me fairly for my work. What unfolded exactly 1 year later, at my grandmother's 80th birthday celebration, held in a flower field I'd cultivated entirely with my own 2 hands, became the chapter of our family history that no one dares speak aloud. My sister stood surrounded by those blossoms, confronted by everything I'd created from nothing, and completely unraveled in front of 30 assembled relatives. The resulting fracture split our family down its very foundation, and the pieces have never been reassembled. But here's the truth they've never grasped. I wasn't the force that shattered our family into fragments. I simply stopped holding the broken pieces together. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women who spent lifetimes being told to make themselves smaller finally share their complete narratives, delivered with composure from beginning to end. If you've ever been the person expected to thrive in isolation while everyone else received constant support, this story belongs to you. Leave your thoughts in the comments section below, and make certain you subscribe, because you'll want to witness what transpired in that flower field. To properly explain the birthday incident, I need to first explain the household dynamics. Our family functioned like a hospital emergency department. Whoever demonstrated the most urgent distress received everything available: the financial resources, the undivided attention, both parents simultaneously mobilized. And my sister Brianna consistently presented as the most critical case. I was 7 years old when I deciphered the underlying mathematics. My second-grade musical performance coincided exactly with an evening when Brianna, then 10, developed a stomach complaint that mysteriously evaporated by 9 o'clock. Not a single family member attended my recital. My mother delivered her explanation during the car ride home, her voice patient as a bank teller methodically counting currency. "Your sister required our presence. I'm confident you performed wonderfully." When I reached 12, I'd carefully saved my own birthday money to purchase white sneakers. Within weeks, they transformed into communal footwear the moment Brianna decided her own pair caused discomfort. When educators praised my achievements, my mother repackaged the accomplishments before they reached our dinner table: quieter, diminished, matters we didn't emphasize. Emphasis was a resource reserved exclusively for Brianna's needs. I want to establish fairness here because fairness constitutes the entire foundation of this narrative. My parents never struck me. I received adequate nutrition, appropriate clothing, transportation to school. But within the Bishop household, being fine wasn't an emotional state, it was an assigned occupation. I was hired for that position at age 7 and never received a single day's reprieve. The one person who recognized this calculation was my father. He'd catch my gaze across the wreckage of yet another disrupted evening and offer a slight nod, like someone observing incoming whether they had no intention of seeking shelter from. The summer I turned 15, he discovered me weeding Grandma Ruth's garden beds and announced seemingly from nowhere, "18 is yours, kiddo. Whatever celebration you want. That's my promise." I planted that promise deeper than any seed I'd ever placed in soil. That became my fundamental mistake. It required 3 full years to germinate into the worst evening of my existence. You need to understand my sister Brianna properly, because this narrative isn't fair to her either, just unfair in an entirely different configuration. Brianna was 21 that autumn, 3 years my senior, and had already enrolled in and subsequently abandoned 2 separate colleges. Each departure arrived identically: a midnight phone call, a crisis situation, my mother mobilizing resources like a military operation. Nobody in our household ever employed the word failure. Instead, Brianna wasn't adequately supported. Brianna possessed greater sensitivity than typical individuals. Every collapse received rebranding until it resembled a medical diagnosis. And every diagnosis arrived with expenses my parents felt honored to cover. Here's what I understood only years afterward: they constructed her that way deliberately. From infancy, Brianna received messaging that she was fragile. Consequently, fragility became her entire identity, requiring constant assistance to find who she was, the same way not require. NG assistance defined who I was. We were both assigned these roles before we could articulate full sentences. The clearest illustration I can provide is the evening of my FFA banquet during the spring of my 16th year. I'd earned a county ribbon for a raised bed irrigation system I'd designed independently, the first achievement I'd ever been publicly recognized for. My parents attended, which genuinely shocked me. Then Brianna called from a parking lot, sobbing about boyfriend troubles, and our family dinner concluded before the awards ceremony finished. I rode home clutching my ribbon. In our kitchen, Brianna noticed it, and her expression crumpled as though I'd physically assaulted her. "Tonight was devastating for me," she stated, "and you're standing there displaying a prize. This moment is supposed to center on me right now." She delivered this statement the way someone cites an established regulation, because within our household, it functioned as one. My mother prepared tea for Brianna. Nobody requested to examine my ribbon. I pinned it inside my closet door, where possessions that belonged exclusively to me had to exist. What preserved my sanity was soil itself. At 14, I began working weekends at Holly's greenhouse on our town's outskirts, transporting plant flats and washing containers for June Hollies, who was 63, constructed like reinforced fencing, and constitutionally incapable of delivering false praise. June compensated me with actual wages, occasional eye rolls, and unrequested advice, which is to say, she compensated me more generously than anyone previously had. By 17, I could operate her entire seed room independently. Every paycheck deposited into a savings account at First Hartwell Bank. The balance reached $9,412 by that September, 3 years' worth of Saturdays converted into currency. One critical detail: I'd opened that account at 14, and banking regulations required an adult cosigner, making it a joint account with my mother's name attached. At 17, I requested to establish my own independent account. The teller explained I'd require parental authorization until reaching 18. Mom smiled warmly and responded, "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." She repeated that exact phrase in June, and again in August. I noticed this pattern. I want that observation documented officially. I absolutely noticed. Consequently, I began skimming my own harvest, cashing modest amounts. $20 here, $40 there, folding the bills into an empty coffee tin concealed behind my winter boots. By September, that tin contained $1,300. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that mothers don't require surveillance like approaching storms. Looking back now, I wasn't being paranoid whatsoever. I was being dangerously slow to recognize reality. The remaining money sat where it sat because a 17-year-old cannot override a co-signature, and because some part of me still believed the account represented shared cultivation instead of what it actually was: land titled in someone else's name that I simply worked. The celebration I'd planned wasn't extravagant by most standards. Dinner in Grandma Ruth's backyard, string lights suspended in the maple tree, a sheet cake from Hartwell Bakery, chocolate with cream filling, my name inscribed in yellow icing, 15 people, folding chairs, June invited and threatening to actually attend. That comprised my entire vision. One single evening, one table, everyone's attention directed identically for once. And that direction was toward me. Dad had promised. For 3 years, I'd carried that promise like a seed packet, repeatedly checking the planting date. 18 also represented a threshold. I'd been accepted into the state agricultural program beginning spring term, and beyond it, blurry but genuine, existed the only future I'd ever wanted: a cut flower farm bearing my own name. Grandma Ruth was the person who first shaped that vision in my mind. She cultivated dahlias behind her house on Maple Street, a deep crimson variety her family had maintained since the year my father was born. Petals so profoundly dark they resembled velvet absorbing light. That August, she walked me down her flower rows, touched a bloom gently, and stated, "Flowers don't apologize for occupying garden space, Celeste. Notice that." I did notice. I noticed it the way you notice a door standing open that had always appeared sealed. Then, 3 weeks before my birthday, Brianna announced her third educational program, a wellness and design semester in Columbus. Very exclusive, very urgent, she explained. It required an immediate deposit, she insisted, or her placement would transfer to someone whose family believed in supporting them. I remember my exact position when she delivered this announcement, because our kitchen fell silent in a way I'd been trained since childhood to interpret. Silence in our household product. The sound of money changing direction. Brianna lasted exactly 11 days in Columbus. 4 days before my birthday, a Friday, she returned home at 1 o'clock in the morning. I heard the front door opening, then the particular register of her crying, the tone that meant household arrangements were about to reorganize around her distress. By breakfast, our house had acquired new gravitational forces. Mom moved through the kitchen like a triage nurse, murmuring into her phone. Dad sat with his coffee, studying the table surface. Brianna occupied the center of our couch, wrapped in the good quilt, narrating Columbus's unfairness to anyone passing within earshot. I prepared toast and said absolutely nothing, which was my assigned function. That evening, I overheard Mom in the hallway on the phone with Aunt Patty, my father's sister. Her voice carried that planning tone, low and smooth, the one she employed when a narrative was being tailored for public presentation. I caught the phrase, "What's best for the family right now?" and the smaller phrase following it, aimed at me without my name attached. Well, she's got her whole life for parties. I stood in my room holding a stack of paper invitations I'd hand-lettered myself, because we'd never gotten around to sending them, because something in me had known better than to make anything official. 15 envelopes. I'd drawn a small dahlia on each one. I placed them in my desk drawer face down and told myself the mathematics could still work somehow. That even in our emergency room household, a girl only turns 18 once, and surely that outranked simple homesickness. The following morning, Saturday, my mother knocked on my door carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. She had her gift-wrapping voice activated, and I knew before she spoke exactly which gift was about to be rescinded. She perched on my bed's edge and arranged her features into kindness. "Sweetheart, about Tuesday." Tuesday, mind you, my birthday had been reduced to a mere day of the week. "Your dad and I have been discussing this. With everything your sister is processing, a party right now would simply rub salt in her wounds. Watching you celebrate while her life is upside down, honey, it would absolutely break her." I asked what specifically they wanted to do. "Postpone," Mom answered, bright as a promotional coupon. "Just until Brianna's stronger emotionally, we'll organize something small later. Family only." Later, in the Bishop household, later was where my belongings went to die permanently. I looked at her directly and did something I'd never done at that kitchen table pitch of my existence. I asked the genuine question. "When exactly is my turn scheduled, Mom? I'd like to see the calendar." Her expression flickered momentarily, then settled, and she delivered the sentence that has followed me for 11 years. "Oh, Celeste, don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own." There it was, the family constitution read aloud at last. Being fine was my contribution, the tax I paid so the household budget could balance. Behind her, my dad appeared in the doorway. This is the part that stayed sharp longer than any other detail. He looked at me and he knew. 18 is yours, kiddo, I promise." He placed one hand on the door frame, opened his mouth, and then Brianna called from downstairs, wet and urgent, and the doorway stood empty. 30 seconds, perhaps less. That's how long a 3-year promise takes to collapse completely. Mom squeezed my knee on her way out. "You'll understand when you have a sensitive child," she said. I sat very still after they departed, listening to the house arrange itself around my sister 1 floor below. I didn't rage and I didn't beg. And if you've ever been designated the strong one, you understand why. Practice. What I did was open my laptop and check the balance on that savings account. Then that evening, the bakery called, and everything crystallized with absolute clarity. The girl from Hartwell Bakery was calling to confirm changes on Order 41. I stated I hadn't made any changes. She read them to me anyway, cheerful, oblivious, each word landing like gravel. Same cake. New pickup day, Saturday, new inscription. They'd kept my chocolate sheet cake, the one with cream filling I'd selected in July, and had my name scraped from the order form. It now read, "Welcome home, Brianna." There was going to be an encouragement dinner the following Saturday night, 4 days after my birthday would pass unacknowledged, And the guest list, I learned later, overlapped mine almost completely. Same aunts, same cousins, same folding chairs. My party hadn't been postponed whatsoever. It had been harvested for components. I thanked the bakery employee because none of this was her fault, disconnected, and stood in my room, while something in my chest went very quiet and very level, like a field after the harvester passes. People think decisions like mine are. Made in flames, mine wasn't. It arrived the way frost comes, clear sky, no wind, everything simply finished growing. I took my 2 duffel bags down from the closet shelf. I packed work clothes, boots, the ribbon from inside the closet door, the 15 envelopes I'd never sent. I retrieved the coffee tin from behind my winter boots and counted its contents by touch. Then I sat on my bed and made one phone call to the only adult who'd ever compensated me on time and with intention. June Hollies listened for approximately 10 seconds. The loft over the seed room has a bed in it, she stated. It's drafty, rent's $40 a month and you'll earn it before sunrise. Come or don't. My birthday was still 3 days distant. I didn't wait for it. I moved out that same night. Leaving a house you grew up in takes approximately 4 minutes when you've been packing your whole life without conscious awareness of it. I descended the stairs with a duffel on each shoulder. Mom was at the kitchen island with her tea. She looked at the bags, then at me, and selected irritation over alarm. Oh, for heaven's sake, Celeste, don't be theatrical. Where exactly do you think you're going? I said I had work in the morning, which was accurate, and left the remainder unspoken. Brianna watched from the couch with the quilt pulled to her chin, and for half a second, something crossed her features that looked almost like envy, of the bags, of the door, of a person who got to be the one leaving. Dad followed me onto the porch. He pressed a folded envelope into my hand, $60 in creased 5s and 10s, the cash of a man who'd been quietly emptying his pockets into a drawer for some time. Call your grandmother Sundays, he said. She'll worry. He didn't say don't go. We both heard him not say it. I walked the 2 miles to Holly's greenhouse under a September sky the color of a bruised plum. And when I let myself into the seed room, the warm smell of soil met me like somebody glad I'd arrived. The loft was drafty, exactly as promised. I lay on the narrow bed and understood something I'd been circling for years. Being fine was the rent I'd paid to live in that house. That night, I stopped paying. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a grocery store cupcake with 1 candle June stuck in it, embarrassed by her own gesture. Then Wednesday morning, I went to the bank to collect my 3 years of Saturdays. And that's when the teller's face changed. I'd come in to open my own account. Finally, no cosigner needed, and transfer my savings across. The teller pulled up the joint account, and her smile did that thing bank smiles do when the screen disagrees with the customer. The balance was $912. $8,500 had been withdrawn 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Brianna's very exclusive Columbus program needed its deposit right away. Every stall made sense at once. After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time. My mother hadn't been forgetting to cosign my paperwork. She'd been keeping the gate open until she finished using the field. And here is the part I want every listener to sit with. It was completely legal. A joint account belongs to both names on it. She didn't steal a dime as far as the law is concerned. She just spent my 3 years of Saturdays on a program my sister quit in 11 days. I called her from the parking lot. She didn't even pause. Family money goes where the family needs it, Celeste. Your sister's future was on the line. You're young and you're healthy. You'll earn it back in no time. Then, gentler, like a tip left for a waitress. This is what families do. I went back inside, withdrew the $912, and closed the account with both hands steady. I waited until I was in the truck June had lent me before I let them shake. By Sunday, my mother had already told the family her version of everything: the party, the bags, the bank. I discovered this from a voicemail. It seems I was now the villain of a story I hadn't even been allowed to read. The official Bishop family version went like this. Celeste threw a tantrum over a birthday party, abandoned her sister during a mental health crisis, and stormed out to punish everyone. It played at church. It played at the hair salon. It played especially well with Aunt Patty, my dad's sister, who left me the voicemail. "I'm just disappointed, honey. Your mother is heartbroken. A party, Celeste, really." I didn't call back and argue, and I want to explain why. Because it wasn't weakness. My mother had been rehearsing the family narrator role for 52 years. Arguing with her in front of her audience was playing an away game against a Hall of Famer. I decided my side of the story would have to grow up out of the ground, where nobody could talk over it. The first Sunday of October, a mud-brown sedan crunched into the greenhouse lot, and my grandmother Ruth climbed out. 79 years old, cane in one hand. A shoebox under her arm. She looked around the seed room like a woman inspecting a fence line, then set the box on the potting bench. Inside, packed in wood shavings, were dahlia tubers, knobby, ugly, miraculous things dug from the crimson row behind her house on Maple Street. Her family had kept that variety alive since the year my father was born. "You know what these are," she said. "It wasn't a question. Plant them somewhere they'll get looked at." Then she patted my cheek with a hand like paper and said she was missing her program. I made it all the way to her taillights before I finally came apart, and I want you to notice, it took a kindness to do it. Being robbed hadn't managed, being handed something did. That fall and winter, my life shrank to a rhythm you could set a watch by. Greenhouse from 5:30 to 2, hauling, watering, learning June's seed room like scripture. Then the dinner shift at Rosie's Diner until 10, carrying meatloaf specials to men who tipped in quarters and advice. Back in the loft, I read June's beat-up growing books until the words swam. Succession planting, cold hardiness, stem counts per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out, which June assured me was the whole job. I also wrote to the state agricultural program and deferred my spot 1 year. I told them it was financial. It was, but it was also this. Somewhere between the bank and the shoebox, my plan had changed shape. Meanwhile, across town, my $8,500 had bought my sister a semester she never finished and a bedroom she never left. Grandma Ruth reported in on Sundays, dry as toast. "Your sister's resting, your mother's managing, your father's mowing a lawn that stopped growing in October." Let me pause here, friend, because I know some of you are living this exact winter right now. If you have ever worked a double shift while the person who took from you slept in your old bedroom, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And if this story is starting to feel like your story, take 1 second and subscribe, because the next part is where the ground starts to turn. Thanksgiving was approaching, and my mother has never in her life let a holiday go unused. She called the Monday before, voice warm as a casserole. "We want you at the table, sweetheart. This silliness has gone on long enough. We're prepared to put the whole outburst behind us." I asked what putting it behind us involved, because with my mother, forgiveness always came with paperwork. She laid out the terms like she was reading a recipe. I would apologize to Brianna in front of the family for making her setback about me. I would move back into my old room where they could keep an eye on me. I would contribute to the household now that I was so keen on working. And I would let go of this little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself further. I remember looking out the loft window at June's empty backfield while she talked, 2 acres of dead grass with frost on it, and feeling the strangest calm. "And if I say no?" I asked. Her voice cooled a single degree. "We worry about your sister, Celeste. She's delicate. You've always been fine. Honestly, it's the one thing we never had to think about." There it was again, the family constitution, Article 1. I thanked her for the invitation and told her I had to work Thanksgiving morning. The silence on the line had a shape to it. "Then don't bother coming at Christmas either," she said, and hung up first. She always hung up first. I stood with the phone against my ear a while anyway, listening to nothing. Here's what I didn't know that night. It would be almost 10 months before I heard my mother's voice again. And by then, everything about the ground between us would have changed. Christmas Eve. The greenhouse was closed, and the loft was so quiet I could hear the propane heater think about quitting. I'm not going to dress this part up, because some of you have sat in this exact chair. I wrote my mother a Christmas card. Took me an hour, 4 drafts, the last one down to almost nothing, "Merry Christmas, Mom, I'm safe, I'm working." Then I sat with the stamp on my tongue and understood with a clarity that tasted like glue that I wasn't writing to my mother. I was writing to a mother I had invented, one who would read it at the sink and soften and drive over with cocoa. That woman didn't live at my parents' address. I put the card in the drawer with my 15 unsent invitations. The collection was growing. Around 8, headlights swept the lot, and Grandma Ruth let herself into the seed room with a tin of molasses cookies and zero explanation of what she'd told my parents about where she was. We ate them next to the seedling heat mats, and she inspected my spiral notebook like a loan officer, which, looking back, she sort of was. June stumped in near 9 with something wrapped in butcher paper, a spool of striped grosgrain ribbon, heavy. "The good kind. For your first market table," she said, daring me to make it emotional. I didn't dare, but when they'd gone, I stood the spool on the windowsill where the invented mother's card would have lived, and it looked exactly like what it was: a bet. 2 old women had just wagered on a girl with $900 and a shoebox. In January, June raised the stakes herself, and what she offered me came with a contract and no mercy. The second week of January, June walked me out to the backfield in boots and a dead man's barn coat, and made me the offer that split my life into before and after. 2 acres of ground behind the greenhouses, south-facing, water line already run to the old sheep trough. "I don't do charity," she said before I could say anything at all. 3 seasons, $900 a season. First season up front, you supply your own sweat, your own seed, your own mistakes. Written down proper, both signatures, so neither of us can get sentimental about it. $900 was nearly everything left from the account, and everything left in the coffee tin after seed catalogs was already spoken for. Trellis netting, silage tarps, a used walk-behind cedar with a wobble. I stood on the frozen ground and did the math 3 times. The math said no, and something underneath the math said now. I signed at her kitchen table that Friday. 2 acres, $900 and a shoebox. That was my whole inheritance. And it turned out to be enough. The same week, a letter from the state agricultural program sat on my windowsill asking me to confirm my deferred spot. I let the deadline pass on purpose. I want to be honest that it scared me worse than leaving home had. Leaving home, I'd had somewhere to walk to. This time I was walking off the edge of my own map. 18 years old, no college, no family, no backup plan, on land I didn't own. But you cannot grow anything with 1 foot out of the field. That February, when the ground gave, I buried Grandma Ruth's crimson tubers in trays of damp shavings to wake them. And the first green nubs broke through on the exact morning the county paper would have called foolish of me. Spring made me pay for my confidence, almost immediately. I'd started ranunculus and sweet peas early, rows of them, and in late April I planted out ahead of the calendar because the 10-day forecast smiled at me and I wanted to jump on Mother's Day. Then a frost slid down out of Canada on a clear, windless night. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply arrives and files its paperwork. I walked the rows at dawn with my breath hanging, and $400 of seedlings gone to wet brown rags. I'd known better is the thing. June's books had told me. June had told me. I'd heard the warning and gambled anyway because hope is a beautiful liar. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel sick about it, sitting on an overturned bucket at the end of the dead row. Then I got the notebook and wrote down the date, the low, and the lesson, because self-pity doesn't compost into anything, but records do. June came out around 7, surveyed the damage with her hands in her pockets, and delivered the eulogy. "Frost isn't a verdict, girl, it's tuition." We replanted. I leaned harder on the tough things: zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, snapdragons under low tunnels, and I bobbied the dahlias in their trays like a maternity ward, because those weren't just plants. Those were the only heirloom anyone had ever handed me. By the last week of May, the field had gone from graph paper to green rows straight enough that June grunted at them, which from June was a parade. And by the first Saturday of June, I had a problem I'd never once planned for in the spiral notebook. Buckets and buckets of flowers, cut, conditioned, gorgeous, and not one single place to sell them yet. The Hartwell Farmers Market rents you 8 feet of Saturday for $15. I took the space between a honey guy and a woman who sold goat soap, set up a borrowed card table, and dressed it with June's striped ribbon and a chalkboard I'd lettered at midnight. Mixed bouquets, $15. Zinnias like carnival glass, cosmos, snapdragons, blue bachelor's buttons. I'd wrapped 30 bouquets in craft paper and was quietly terrified of coming home with 29. The first customer was a retired teacher who bought 2 and told me nobody had sold real flowers at this market in years. By 10:30, I was restocking from buckets under the table. By noon, I had sold clean out. $340 in a cigar box, most of it in 5s, and my cheeks aching from a shape they weren't used to holding. I'm not going to pretend $340 is wealth. It was less than a week of double shifts. But every bill in that box had been photosynthesized out of ground I'd rented with my own signature. And money like that weighs different. Word moved the way word moves in a town like Hartwell, 2ch. Urch ladies from my mother's own congregation stopped, recognized me, and got very busy smelling the sweet peas. And before the market even closed, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. One line, "A market stall, congratulations." That was the entire message, and if you've ever had a mother like mine, you heard the tone of it exactly. Congratulations, pronounced the way you'd say, "Oh, honey." I read it twice, put the phone in the cash box with the 5s, and sold the last 3 bouquets. I never did answer it. The field answered for me all summer long. In July, a bride named Hannah stopped at my stall, got teary over the snapdragons, and asked if I did weddings. I said yes with the immediate confidence of someone who had never done a wedding. $850 for late August. Bridal bouquet. 5 jars per table. Arch flowers. I spent 2 weeks reading and 1 sleepless night before, floating stems in every vessel June owned, hauling it all in a cooler I'd rigged from a chest freezer box and bagged ice. And late August is when the dahlias came in. Grandma Ruth's crimson broke open fat as saucers, that impossible velvet red, and I built Hannah's bouquet around 9 of them. At the reception, 3 separate women asked the caterer who did the flowers. The caterer pointed across the room at me. "The Dahlia girl," she said. And it stuck the way only accidental names stick. Hannah's mother booked her anniversary party on the spot. 2 bridesmaids took cards I didn't have yet, so I wrote my number on craft paper in florist's crayon, and June laughed at me the whole drive home. Something had shifted, and I could feel it the way you feel a season change through a window before you open the door. The stall was no longer a stall. It was becoming a thing that needed a name. By Labor Day weekend, it had one. My best friend Maddie Price had been showing up on Saturdays since June, first for gossip, then for pay. She's the one who sanded an old fence board, painted Bishop blooms on it in buttermilk white, and screwed it to the market stall before I could vote. Bishop blooms, my name in paint in public. I stood there feeling naked about it, which tells you everything about how I was raised. By September, the operation looked like an actual business if you squinted with kindness. 25 porch subscription customers took a wrapped bouquet every Friday. Peak market Saturdays cleared $600. Hannah's wedding photos were making the rounds of every engaged girl in the county. I paid June for season 2 in full, early, in cash, mostly to watch her fight down a smile. She took it and said the trellis rows were crooked, which in June meant congratulations. Here's what I want you to notice, though, because it matters for what's coming. I still worked the back of the stall. Maddie chatted the customers. I kept my hat brim low and my hands busy. Some habits are load-bearing. Being seen still felt like standing in a doorway I wasn't invited through. Meanwhile, Grandma Ruth's Sunday bulletins kept coming. Brianna had quit an online course in June and gone quiet. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which Ruth said was its own kind of mention. The whole town was doing arithmetic my mother couldn't stop. A girl who supposedly stormed off over a party doesn't usually surface a year later with a field, a sign, and a waiting list. And then the Tuesday after Labor Day, a number I didn't recognize lit my phone, the county paper. And the first thing I told that nice reporter was no. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and she wrote the county paper's farm and table column. Somebody at the market had tipped her. I suspected the goat soap woman, who considered my life a serial drama. Dana wanted a profile. Young grower, heirloom dahlias, the whole thing. And my mouth said, "Oh, no thank you," before my brain even sat up, the reflex of a girl trained from birth to hand the microphone down the table. I told June about it that evening, expecting agreement, because June regarded publicity the way she regarded aphids. Instead, she set her coffee down with a click. "Girl, for a year other people have been telling your story at every supper table in this county, and you handed them the pen because keeping your head down felt like good manners." She pushed the mug away. "You hide your face, they'll keep writing your story for you. That reporter's offering you the pen back, take it." I called Dana back the next morning. She came Thursday with a photographer, walked my rows for 2 hours and asked questions nobody in my family had ever asked me. Why dahlias? Why flowers at all? What had the frost taught me? What did the sign mean? When the photographer looked for a backdrop, I did the bravest thing I'd done since a September night with 2 duffel bags. I didn't hide behind an armload of stems or put Maddie beside me. I stood alone, dead center in the crimson row in my work. Prawn dirt on my knuckles, and looked straight into the lens. The story ran the following Thursday, front of the features section. By Thursday noon, my mother had read it. By Thursday night, so had every single person she'd ever handed her version to. The headline read, "The 18-year-old behind Bishop blooms." There was the field, the sign, the velvet-red dahlias, and me looking at the camera like a person entitled to be in a photograph. Dana had written it clean and warm. The greenhouse job at 14, the lease 2 acres, the frost, the wedding, the heirloom tubers from my grandmother. She never mentioned my parents at all, which read louder in Hartwell than anything she could have printed. The town did the math in one sitting. Women I'd never met joined the subscription list with notes like, "So proud of you, honey." The church ladies who'd once inspected the sweet peas now stopped by the stall to say, "Your grandmother must be so pleased." And my mother's telling of things, tantrum, party, abandonment, folded quietly, the way a lie folds when a photograph walks into the room. She called Friday morning. "No hello, you put our family's business in the newspaper, Celeste." I pointed out that the article never mentioned the family at all. "Exactly," she said, and her voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard. "Everyone's asking your sister what she's doing now, at the pharmacy, at church. Do you understand what that does to her? Of course you don't. You've always been fine. You have no idea what it's like for her." I looked out at 2 acres of proof and said gently, "You're right, Mom, I don't." And then, for the first time in my entire life, I hung up first. Brianna, for her part, said nothing at all. No text, no message through Ruth. From a house where feelings were broadcast at full volume, silence was a new instrument. I should have wondered harder what it was tuning up for. Because the next call came from my grandmother, with a demand. Grandma Ruth turned 80 at the end of September, and she called me herself, which she did roughly never, phones being in her view a fad. "They're planning my birthday," she said. "Patty wants the church hall. Your mother wants the house where she can manage things." A pause, and I could hear her smiling around her own idea. "I told them I've sat in both those rooms for 80 years. I want my party in your field, in the middle of something honest." "I already told the whole family," she added. "I announced it so nobody could wiggle." I sat down on a bucket. My field, 30-odd bishops and bishop-adjacent relatives, including 2 parents and 1 sister I had not laid eyes on in a year, standing in the middle of everything I'd built out of the wreckage they'd handed me. "Grandma," I said, "Mom will never come." "She'll come," Ruth said, flat as a griddle. "Skipping my 80th after this year in front of everyone, your mother would rather chew glass. That's exactly why I did it, Sweetbia. It's my birthday. I'm allowed 1 present, I pick myself." She wanted truth in the room. This woman wanted it planted where nobody could talk over it. "Now, friend, before we walk into that field together, I want to know something, honestly, down in the comments. Would you have let them come? Because I almost said no." I stood in my rows for an hour after that call, arguing with the dahlias. If this were you, the cancelled party, the empty account, the year of silence, tell me what you'd have done. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because a cancelled 18th birthday is about to end at an 80th. 1 week out, my mother called. She had a small favor. 2 weeks after I'd hung up on her, she called back and opened with logistics as if nothing had happened. How many chairs? Would there be shade? Should Patty bring her lemon bars? Then casually, the way you'd slip a knife into a picnic basket. One small thing, sweetheart. Someday when people ask about the farm, and they will, it would mean the world if you'd present it as a family project. Because honestly, that's what it is if you think about it. You learned your work ethic somewhere. I actually laughed, one short syllable I couldn't hold in. She pressed on, voice sweetening the way it did when the ask was the whole point of the call. And we think it would be healing. Dr. Feldman thinks it would be healing for Brianna to have a role there. Events, parties, that sort of thing, she has such an eye, it doesn't need to be formal. Sunday, just if it comes up, you could mention Brianna handles events for Bishop Bloom's. She needs a win, Celeste. You have so many now. There it was, the emergency room billing department, open for business. My party, my savings, and now the ask had simply scaled up with the harvest. My name, my field, my year of frost and double shifts, reissued as a family project, with my sister installed in the story like a transplant the body was supposed to accept. No, Mom, I said, calm as I could. Make it, which by then was very calm. The farm isn't an apology and it isn't a prop, but you're all welcome Sunday as guests. I'd genuinely like you to come. The silence went on one beat too long. Fine, she said lightly. And I thought I'd closed the door on the ambush. Looking back, I had only closed the front one. The party fell on the last Sunday of September, 1 year, almost to the week, since I'd carried 2 duffel bags down my parents' stairs. Saturday we set up. Maddie and June hauled the long tables into the center aisle between the dahlia rows, and I strung lights through the fence posts and the young maple by the gate. String lights, the exact kind I'd once planned for a backyard on Maple Street. And yes, I noticed. And yes, I hung them anyway. We cut 200 stems of Ruth's crimson and stood them in zinc buckets down the tables. The field was at its absolute peak, that late September flush when dahlias burn brightest right before frost, as if they know. Mid-afternoon, a familiar truck eased up the lane. My father, alone, with 40 folding chairs from the church hall. We hadn't stood face to face in a year. He got out, looked down the rows for a long moment and said, "Ground drains good here." That's a love letter in my father's dialect. We set up chairs together for an hour, mostly quiet. Twice he stopped, straightened, half-turned to me with his mouth already open, and both times folded whatever it was back up and put it away like the $60 in fives. At the gate, leaving, he tried again and got as far as "Your grandmother's real proud," then drove off toward the house where my mother was, no doubt, ironing the outfits and the story both. Maddie found me watching the taillights, ready for tomorrow. No, I said, set out the coffee urn anyway. The next afternoon, 31 members of my family walked into my field. Every single one of them came, even her, especially her. They came up the lane in a caravan of sensible sedans, and I watched 31 people meet my field for the first time. You could see it land on each face at the gate. The aunts going quiet mid-sentence, the cousins lifting their phones, Uncle Ray actually taking off his cap. Late September had dressed the place better than I ever could. 200 crimson dahlias down the long tables, the light going gold, the rose burning red out to the fence line. Grandma Ruth arrived like a head of state, took one slow lap of the center aisle on Patty's arm, and installed herself at the head table where she could supervise both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped out of the car in her navy church dress, and I'll give her this, she never once looked surprised. She toured the tables like a hostess, straightening a jar here, angling a bucket there, telling Aunt Carol, "Oh, we always knew Celeste had the gift. She gets it from my side, I grew things before the girls came along." Smooth as fondant. A year of tantrum and abandonment, repaved in one afternoon into "we always knew." I let it go by. The field didn't need me to argue for it. Brianna came last. 40 minutes late in a dress too formal for folding chairs, hair done like armor. She hugged Grandma Ruth for the photo, took a glass of lemonade she didn't drink, and then drifted the perimeter alone, reading my life like an audit. I watched her stop at the gate where Maddie's fence board sign hung, Bishop Blooms, buttermilk white, and stand in front of it, very still, for longer than anyone stands in front of a sign. Patty appeared at my elbow with lemon bars and a look. "You okay?" "Ask me at sundown," I said. Just before the toasts, I went to cut a few last stems for the cake table and found my mother standing alone at the far end of the crimson row, where the party noise thinned out to bees. She didn't hear me coming. She was touching one of the big saucer blooms with 2 fingers, barely, the way you'd touch a sleeping baby or a stove you suspect is hot, and her face had gone somewhere I'd never once been invited. "We had rows like this," she said, not really to me. "Behind the house on Delancey Street, I started a whole flat of seeds the spring I was 19. Zinnias, asters, I had a notebook. I stood still the way you do, when a wild thing hasn't spotted you yet. Then your grandma Ellen got sick, and it was 2 years start to finish, and I was the one. Denny couldn't handle hospitals, so it was me, every day, before work and after." Her fingers left the pedal. "He got the truck when she passed, you know. Everyone said he'd been through so much. My flat of seeds dried up on the windowsill. Nobody watered it. Everybody was busy telling Denny how strong he was going to have to be." For the length of one breath, standing in the row my hands had made, I saw her whole. A girl with a notebook, milled through the same machine 30 years before me. My throat undid itself. I almost said, "Mom, I know." "That's the closest we ever came. ND, I mean in my entire life." Then she felt me there, and her spine reassembled, and the visitor left her face like a light switched off in a farmhouse window. "That's life, Celeste," she said briskly, already turning toward the tables. "The strong ones carry it. That's what love is." She walked back to the party. I stood in the row and let the bees have the silence. And then the spoon began to ring against the glass. Grandma Ruth stood without help, which she wanted noted, and raised her lemonade to the field. 80 years, she said, and I've had my birthdays in kitchens, church halls, and one memorable year a hospital. This is the first one I ever had in the middle of something honest. She turned to the buckets of crimson on the tables. "My mother grew this dahlia. I grew it the year Tommy was born and every year after. And last fall I gave the tubers to my granddaughter, because a flower like this needs hands that show up in frost, and I know showing up hands when I see them." She looked straight at me, and her chin was trembling and her voice was not. "It never had a proper name, that flower. So today I'm naming it in front of witnesses so it sticks. Ruth's Crimson, grown by Celeste Bishop, on Celeste Bishop's farm. This field is the most honest thing this family has grown in 30 years. The applause came warm and real, and 31 faces turned toward me. And for once in my life, I stood in the light and did not check the exits. And that is the exact moment my mother rose from her chair, glass high, smile wide, and rode the applause like a woman catching a departing train. "And one more piece of happy news, everyone, while we're all together," her voice carried to the fence posts. "You've all read about our Celeste in the paper. Well, Bishop Blooms is becoming a true family business. Brianna, honey, stand up. Brianna's going to be running all the events and parties here at the farm. Both our girls together. We are just so proud of our girls." The clapping started up again. Uncertain, the way crowds clap when something feels off but nobody wants to be the first to notice. Down the table, Aunt Patty's eyes found mine and asked the question. And beside my mother, my sister was rising slowly to her feet, glass in hand. And the glass was already shaking. I didn't raise my voice. I've thought about it many times since, and I'm certain of that, because a lifetime of practice holds even when your ears are ringing. I looked at my mother across the long table, 31 relatives between us, and said, "That's not true, Mom, and it's not going to be." Simple as a frost report. The uncertain clapping died. My mother's smile held its position, but something behind it began working hard. She opened her mouth to smooth it. She was always fastest in open country, and she never got there. Because Brianna's glass hit the table, and my sister made a sound I'd never heard from her. A laugh with the bottom torn out of it. "Of course it's not true," she said too loud and then louder. "Nothing about us is true. You want to clap for the girls. You want to hear about the girls." Her voice climbed into a register that silenced bees. "It was supposed to be me. Everything was supposed to be me. That was the deal. That was the whole deal." She swung toward the relatives like a lawn sprinkler. "You think she built this alone? You know they canceled her 18th birthday because I cried, canceled the party, kept the cake, changed the name on it. My name, I ate that cake." She was crying now, mascara going, 22 years of curated fragility burning off like fog. "And the money, oh, you should know about the money. They took her savings, $8,500, her money, her paychecks, and they poured it into me, into Columbus, and I flushed it in 11 days like I flush everything." My mother was on her feet, saying her name in that emergency room voice. "Brianna, sweetheart, you're not well." And Brianna wheeled on her, arm flung wide, and her hand caught the zinc bucket at the head table. It went over slow, the way disasters do. Water sheeted across the linen. 24 stems of Ruth's crimson spilled and rolled onto the September grass, red on green, in front of the entire family. And in the ocean of that silence, Aunt Patty stood up, white to the lips, looked at my mother and said, "You told us she left over a party." What I remember best about the next minute is the quiet. A whole field of people not moving. June by the coffee urn with her arms crossed, watching my mother the way she'd watch a hawk over a henhouse. Brianna sobbing into her hands, done, emptied, smaller than I'd ever seen her. And my mother, kneeling on the grass in her navy dress, gathering fallen dahlias into her arms one by one, because her hands needed a task while her empire did its arithmetic. Then she looked up at me, and she said it low just for us, while the whole field held its breath behin. "Dime. Fix this." Her eyes were wet and absolutely steady. "You can fix this, Celeste. Tell them the party was a misunderstanding. Tell them we helped you start this place. We're your parents, it's barely even a lie. Give your sister the events job, that's all. And this goes back together, and you come home. Sunday dinners, your room, your family. You can finally come home, sweetheart." And here is the part I need you to understand. I wanted it. 11 years later, I can say that plainly. Every cell in me that was ever 7 years old wanted it, because it was the thing itself, the actual prize, held out in the open air at last. My mother asking me to come home. All I had to do was pay for it. Same currency as always. Shrink the truth, hand over the story, share the name on the sign, disappear at my own table one more time. I looked at her arms full of my grandmother's flowers. I heard the field behind me full of people finally seeing. "You're right, Mom," I said, and my voice came out level as a floor. "I've always been fine on my own. You made sure I got the practice." Her arms tightened around the stems. "But I'm not buying my seat back. Not with the truth, not with the farm, not with me. You're welcome at my table as guests, both of you. Any Sunday you want, that's the whole offer. It doesn't go on sale." My mother stood up slowly, still holding the dahlias, and for a second I thought, even then I thought. Then she laid them on the table like evidence, took Brianna by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back. She never has. The party didn't end so much as exhale. Ruth announced to no one in particular that it was the best birthday she'd had in 80 years, and she'd thank people not to argue, and somehow that gave everyone permission to stay another hour. Patty cut the cake with shaking hands, and kept looking at me like a woman rereading a letter she'd filed wrong. But my father stood at the gate a long time after my mother's car had gone. He'd ridden over with Uncle Ray, I realized later, on purpose. When I brought him his jacket, he turned his cap around in his hands like a wheel he was steering. "I should have said something at your birthday," he said to the gravel. "I've been saying nothing for 20 years, Celeste. Turns out it's the loudest thing I ever did." I told him I knew, not it's okay. I was done saying that one, just, "I know, Dad." He nodded and got in Ray's truck and went home to the house he'd chosen every day of my life, because he was who he was. But that November, letters started coming. One a month, his handwriting like barbed wire. 4 lines at a time. Saw dahlias on a calendar at the feed store. Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad. I kept every one. When the last taillights left, June and Maddie stacked chairs, and Ruth sat sentry over the cake plate, and I walked out alone to the far end of the crimson row, with the evening coming down blue and cold. One stem lay snapped where the bucket had gone over. I picked it up and stood there in the dark field that was mine, and understood the last thing, the one I'd been circling all year without landing. I had stopped paying rent a year ago, but I'd kept waiting for the landlord to drive by and see the garden and want me back. That was over now. It had walked out of the field on its own 2 feet. Ruth's voice carried down the rows behind me, ordering Maddie to put the broken stem in water. Cut flowers aren't dead flowers, she called. Somebody bring that in the house. Here's where it all settled, in the plain math of afterward. The family did crack, exactly the way the town still tells it. Patty came to the farm the next weekend with lemon bars and an apology she'd written out longhand so she wouldn't botch it, and read it to me at the potting bench, and we both pretended June wasn't listening from the seed room. Sunday dinners moved to Grandma Ruth's little kitchen on Maple Street. Ruth, Patty, Maddie, half the time, me, smelling of eucalyptus and cooler water. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to be smaller. My mother tried a new version for a while. Brianna was overtired. Celeste is going through a phase, you know how girls are. But a story needs listeners, and hers kept moving their subscriptions to the other side of the aisle, in some cases, literally. She still lives 2 miles up the road. We have not spoken since she walked out of the field, and I've made my peace with the strong possibility that we never will. Because peace was on offer only at a price I don't pay anymore. My father writes his 4 lines a month and slips a 20 in at Christmas like contraband and loves me the way a man loves from inside a fence he built himself. I've stopped grading it. It's what he has. And Brianna, one night that winter, past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words my sister had sent me in over a year. The flowers were beautiful. TH. That's all, no apology, no follow-up. And when I saw her across the pharmacy in March, she looked at her shoes. I heard she moved in with a friend in Columbus. Got a job at a garden center, of all places on this round earth. I never answered the text. I never deleted it either. Some seeds you just leave in the packet and see how you feel come spring. The farm went on being a farm, which is the quiet miracle of farms. Season 3 sold out its subscriptions by April. Ruth's Crimson went in the ground in May, 300 tubers strong, every one descended from a shoebox. And in June, a girl named Sadie started showing up. 14. 4H all elbows and silence. The kind of kid who wins ribbons nobody drives to see. Her mother needed her to be no trouble, and Sadie was aiming to oblige. And I recognized the species on sight. I pay her actual wages. I make her invoice me out loud, looking me in the eye. And the first time she managed it without apologizing, I gave her a raise on the spot. Last week I caught her bossing a customer's kid away from the seedling trays, hands on hips, taking up her whole entire patch of the doorway, and I had to go stand in the cooler for a minute. That's the crop I'm proudest of, if you're asking. Not the flowers. The girl learning 3 years earlier than I did that she's allowed to send a bill for what she gives, and that anybody who only loves her invisible isn't family. They're just a landlord with your childhood photos on their walls. If there's one thing I'd carve on a fence and nail up where every fine on her own girl could read it, it's this. Love you have to earn by disappearing isn't love, it's rent. And the day you stop paying, you finally find out who was family and who was just collecting. That's my story, a canceled cake, a shoebox of dahlia tubers, 2 acres and 1 signature. If you've been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something of your own this year and stand where it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you'd have said in that field, and if this story stayed with you, subscribe to Calm Drama Stories. Next week, another woman tells the whole truth, calmly to the end.